Well, hello. This is Brian, the Theoretical Gamer. What I'm going to talk about is not directly gaming related. It might be indirectly gaming related. It might be tangentially gaming related. Mainly because, well, most games use monsters. A lot of them use gods. I'm going to call this video Gods and Monsters. What does this mean? On a thread on Facebook, it may have been in the RPG Brigade or another RPG related one. I'm a member of a lot of groups, but someone mentioned how the undead weren't scary anymore and how to make them scary. And I kind of put a little post in there saying that it's not really the game's fault or the player's fault. It's media in general started portraying them, started defanging them, so to speak. And I think it happens eventually to any monster over time. You know, I'm not talking about niche monsters that no one's heard of, right? Let's go back to the ancient times. The old period prehistory. There were hunter-gatherer tribes. They worshipped gods. The gods were very poorly formed. If they envisioned them at all, they were very animal-like. The thunder god wasn't really a thunder god. It was the thunder. They might give him a name, but he didn't. But he was the thunder. When you heard the thunder, that was the god. I mean, I don't know about. Obviously, you can't make blanket statements about every single tribe all over the world, but for the most part, humans consider themselves part of nature and not really even a fantastically important part of it. You know, they actually believe this saying, sometimes you eat the bar and sometimes the bar eats you. They would go out hunting with their buddies, and sometimes one of their buddies wouldn't make it because it's dangerous out there, or they'd come back to the hut or the tribe or the cave and find out that their favorite mate has been eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. And that's just how life worked. You were born and eventually you probably got killed. Or the winter came and a good chunk of the tribe died. Or any number of reasons. So the gods were forces of nature. They were nature. And we were powerless against it. There were certain things that we could control. You know, we could figure out what plants we could eat. We could figure out what animals were best to hunt. But for the most part, we were this tiny little tribe against this massively huge nature. Eventually, though, we figured out agriculture. We figured out cities. We figured out civilization. We figured out mastery of our environment instead of just being part of the environment and, dying all the time. We figured out how to control it to a certain degree. So as a result, the religion followed suit. You get up to like the Greek and the Roman times, the gods have started to look like us. Just as we mastered our environment, the gods started to reflect our mastery. They were mirror images of us. We became, so, I mean, you go back to Egypt, and that was kind of an interim period. You had humanoids with animal features, but by the time you get up to the Greeks, they look like us. They look like petty versions of us. They were basically kings. They were less forces of nature that you could barely even comprehend. And they were kings, which you could comprehend. You could appeal to. You could get down on your knees and beg for stuff. And hoped that he was, that he would give it to you on a whim, or then take it away from you on another whim, but at least you had it for a brief period, whatever you asked for in a brief period. At least your family survived another day. Then then later on, you start telling stories about those gods, and this, the stories become entertainment. Oh, about people going up against the gods and ultimately failing or being punished, but at least they tried, right? Then, flash forward to the present day. What I'm talking in most of the fiction that we read, there is a lot of what I call the Damon Pratchett model of divinity, which is basically, the idea that gods didn't create us, we created them. There's that underlying sense of atheism that we have really, because we have become complete masters of the environment. The idea that if you were eaten by an animal or a disease or even some accident, it's considered a tragedy, not just part of life. It's not just part of the sadness of life. It's something that we literally don't expect. So, as complete masters of our environment, we have mastered our gods. Most people, atheism is becoming more and more prevalent, or at least secular humanism. The people that do believe are, a lot of them are just weekenders. They go on Sunday and then they, deal with real life. And the idea is that, according to, we've tamed the gods. The belief system in a lot of science fiction and fantasy, and a lot of people, to the point where a lot of people, it's the assumption, is that our belief sustains them, and that if we stop believing in them, they'll go away. Clap your hands if you believe in fairies. That sort of thing. It's, and you can kind of see that happen in other forms of monsters. Let's look at the vampire. The vampire, in medieval times, vampire legends have existed all over the world in some form or another. I think we all have some fear of the dead. Our fear of death mixed with, the idea that once the spirit has fled, that the body gets up and comes after us is, it's a scary one. And I think it pops up in a lot of societies. So in medieval times, the vampire was a lot like the Romero-style zombie of today. There was nothing, it was a bestial creature. It didn't eat brains, but it fed on blood. And it would come out, it would dig itself out of the grave, chase after people, drink their blood, and then stagger back to the grave. And that was it. It was a creature to be feared. And that's it. It was, the soul was gone. And the thing is, though, nowadays then Bram Stoker came up with Dracula. Now, I love this novel, Dracula. I did a video about it before and compared the cast of Dracula to an RPG party. You can go back and watch that if you want. The thing is, though, Dracula took the idea of this ravening beast and made him more urbane, more intelligent, still monstrous, still soullessly evil. But you could talk to him. He could get into your head and make you feel, it's a false sense of security before striking you down. And the idea is, Dracula was very much, but he was still very inhuman. In fact, a lot of the psychology of Dracula himself, he wasn't very smart. At least not in the long-term planning department. It was, even Van Helsing described him as having a child brain. That because he was centuries old, he had developed to a small degree and could make simple plans like, oh wait, I'll hire someone to help me get to London. And then once he got to England, he still instantly became known and tried to bolt back to his hidey hole in Transylvania. He wasn't that smart. And because he had been reborn as this monster, he had the memories of his former self, but he was running on hunger and instinct. And you saw the character of Lucy Westenra, who was killed and brought by Dracula and became a vampire. She was a newly made vampire. She could, and everything about her almost seemed like very animalistic. She had been reborn as almost like this, running on complete instinct, running on hunger and instinct, and she had the memories of Lucy Westenra and could use them to a basic degree, but it was a case of, she could use the raw vampire sexuality and like, it's me, come to me, that sort of thing to someone she knew in life, but it was obviously, there was no real intelligence there. They were still monsters. Then you get up to the 70s and 80s. Anne Rice created the Vampire Chronicles, Interview with the Vampire, The Vampire Lestat. Those I thought were very good novels. They do tend to drag a bit, but they were good. But they pretty much put the nail in the coffin as vampire, as inhuman monster. They were human. They were human with an unnatural hunger and immortality, but they still had, and tried to portray them as becoming slowly inhuman, but they weren't. They had goals and loyalties and desires and feelings and all this and all the human stuff. Then in the early 90s, around 1990 so, Vampire the Masquerade came out, and that was very much it was a game where you would play the vampire, right? And at that point, I think some people did play up the whole inhumanity of vampires, because you also had groups who were playing, blood-sucking superheroes with trench coats and katanas, and that's, they don't want to be scared. They say, vampire, I get to be a vampire? Badass! They became badasses. And then, after that, you got Twilight. They're the love interest. They sparkle. They can choose not to drink human blood because they're a nice person. They're defanged. The gods were defanged. Vampires were defanged. And because they were popular, and all of a sudden, the more popular something is, the more you want to identify with it. You've got like Night of the Living Dead. You've got the Romero zombies staggering around, which is basically like the old school vampire, except mixed with fears about, plagues and global pandemics and end of the world scenarios. Nice little combination. It worked. But then you had more of the same, more zombies, and very recently, there's a TV show that just started called iZombie, which is basically about a cute zombie girl who solves crimes. I haven't seen it. It might be a very good show, but you never know. It's going to be it happens. If a monster becomes popular, it will eventually be defanged. It will eventually we'll stop being scared of it, and we'll start identifying with it. And if you don't believe me, I got 3 words for you: plush Cthulhu doll. You can buy plush Cthulhu dolls. I don't know what the cure for that is. If you're running a game, either use more obscure monsters, like, orcs used to be like the Tolkien evil race of all bad guys, and then there were half orcs, and then Earthon came along, and orcs were a player character race. They got defanged. And in Shadowrun too, orcs, you can play an orc. And it's like, I don't know what to say. I mean, either use an obscure monster no one's heard of, or make the humans the monsters. That's always a good one. We can always think up stuff to put the evil monsters to shame. But, you know, I may be wrong. If you can think of some example of monsters that haven't been defanged, but are still popular, let me know. That's just me. This is me just ranting and rambling. And time for me to head out. See ya.